Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. We're a podcast for founders and entrepreneurs and startups, and also the angels, the VCs, the investment firms, the family offices who work with them. We're on all the major podcast platforms. Make sure to rate us and subscribe. And we're also on YouTube. If you like the full motion video of two people with faces talking to each other, which is what we are. We don't do much beyond that, but that's certainly more than enough. Today, what's interesting, we have SK Lee with us. Welcome, SK. Great to have you.
Thank you. Happy to
She
be
is,
here.
she is the self-described boss lady at the Launch Coaching Lab. But what's interesting about what she's doing to me, from the perspective of our podcast, is that SK is also an investor, an angel. She's a scout. She's kind of got herself in a lot of different situations, all related to what we do here at the Accelerator. So let me start out by saying, or asking rather, did you ever expect that you would be in this industry, and where did you start? What was the starting point?
I mean, the short answer is absolutely not. I went into college studying economics and law, thinking I'd be a lawyer fighting for children's rights and working in politics, actually. And
Oh,
then,
what kind of politics? What were your politics back then?
yeah, I went to Mills College in Oakland, California, and I was part of the San Francisco Young Democrats. I worked for mayoral campaigns. I worked for Kamala Harris's DA campaign back in the
Wow.
day. A couple of local school board elections, etc.
Hmm.
That was my jam. And then I realized that a lot of it was, I don't know, a popularity contest, and I wasn't seeing the kind of impact and
That's
change.
that's being nice about it. And I noticed that you have Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a cartoon over, or a painting over your right shoulder. So I think that pretty much declares where your allegiances lay. So it must have taken something significant or serendipitous to get you out of politics and into more business, the business world. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, I did a couple of internships that really opened my eyes to the speed of impact and progress, and also how much the business world tied to politics. And I wanted to be on the side where I could have the most influence.
And what were the
Because
internships? That's interesting.
so I worked for Mayor Willie
Ah,
Brown.
yeah, I saw Mayor Willie Brown once in Aspen, Colorado, looking very much at home.
Yeah, I worked for him for about a year and a half, from I think ages, let's see, I was 20 to 21. And he took me actually on a trade mission to Shanghai, China. That was my first experience of the mainland. And then I
And
also
you
did
are Chinese American, though, right?
I was born in Taiwan. My parents are from China. So I would say, yeah, Asian American, Taiwanese American.
Taiwanese American. Okay, an
Um,
important distinction. We must.
yes, for some people in the world, a big one. Um, yeah, and then I also did an internship for Mary Hughes at Seton and Hughes, a political consulting firm in college.
And so, how did that lead to your pivot, or your change of direction, or slight change of direction?
Yeah, when I graduated from college, I was looking at jobs, of course, and wasn't quite ready to head off to law school. So I took a job at a big five consulting firm at Accenture. And I think
Mm,
that's when it really shifted. And I started to, I did 2.5 years there. It was a grind, learned a ton about, frameworks, how people
mm.
sell, consulting projects, mergers and acquisitions, all of this new language that I was exposed to. And I was very, very quickly realizing, oh, this is what the world turns on. And
Mm.
so
What precisely does the word world turn on? Money, technology, innovation? When you say that, what do you mean precisely?
I realized that I could have the most impact in business
Mm,
and rather than in local politics, at least
mm,
personally. And I also wanted to be in a place where I was building things rather than fighting for things as a lawyer. Uh,
mm,
and so at the same time, I think it was like my first or second year of management consulting, I joined a couple of folks in launching a magazine called Hyphen Magazine, which is still around today.
Oh, wow.
And that was my sort of first foray into thinking about for profit with some kind of mission driven outcome. So blending the two, the idea that you could have for profit business model, but also positive social outcomes. And that was a really interesting first case study in thinking about how to do two things at once rather than having to choose.
But that idea, so obviously your political background would indicate that you were mission driven as a even younger person, and that you sort of saw a path to find a mission or find a purpose, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
within the business world. So how would you, just now looking back on on your beginnings, on your origins,
Yeah.
on your origin, how would you describe what the mission looked like to you then?
Yeah. When I was in consulting, I knew that I was learning a ton in terms of how to work, and the tools and techniques. But I still felt very much like I wasn't doing good in the world. I wanted to do more. I wanted to actually see more progress. So I began to do this magazine that kind of spurred me to get excited about other things. And I started to learn about the double bottom line and what that means, different kinds of business models, what impact investing was. I then met a couple of folks who were former Accenture people that worked at the KIP Foundation. And so that led me down the path of education as the industry where I could dive in. And
Mhm.
I basically haven't looked back for the last 18 years. I've been in this world of what is the edge of education reform? What are new ideas in education technology? And that was my first foray into it.
And you had some you had some companies, I think, and you had some exits as well.
Yes. So the first chapter of my career, which has been rather meandering, was U.S. ed
Actually,
reform.
I've got to be honest with you. It sounds very focused to me.
Ah,
It sounds like, as a person who also, liked liberal politics and was
mm.
involved. You're talking to a guy who was a delegate. If Birch Bayh had won the Democratic nomination, I would have
Oh,
been one of his delegates to the convention, and he was considered the most liberal candidate in the field. So
mm,
you actually sound very focused
mm.
to me. But so the mission, I guess you could say, became education and hence ed tech, right?
Exactly. Yeah. At the time when I left consulting and went to this sort of nonprofit education reform in the US world, I that was really the only thing that existed where I could have impact in education, but through kind of a different business model. And so I joined the ops team at the KIP Foundation, working on helping them set up infrastructure to scale their charter schools from, a dozen or so at the time
Mm.
to the next target was 50 or so. So that was the biggest um, injection of cash that the KIP Foundation had at that point to really scale nationally. So I got a taste of scale, operational scale, like procurement systems, accounting systems,
Mm.
real estate leases. How do you do that? How do you open 15 schools a year? That is kind of alternative to the existing public school model.
Mhm.
And so that within the 501c nonprofit context was really actually preparation for what I didn't know would come later, which is, for-profit venture-backed hyper-growth scale and what that means.
Mm. And so the charter school idea typically is thought of, perhaps incorrectly, but thought of as kind of a conservative idea. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
particularly in communities, not to stereotype it, but Christian, a bunch of Christian parents in Christian communities did
Mm-hmm.
not want their kids to be educated as heathens in public school, and said, we're gonna start our own schools, our charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
So how did that?
Reconcile, yeah.
Yeah, how did you reconcile that? Because you're coming at it from the other side, but did you become a convert to charter schools?
That was my. I still am torn about charter schools. I think that they work when they work. Do you know what I mean? I think that not all of them are made equal. And KIPP was certainly one of the organizations at the vanguard of using the charter method to improve public education for underserved communities, not necessarily as an alternative for religious purposes. And so that was interesting to me, was the
Yeah,
intervention at the fifth grade to say, okay, we have to start at 10 years old in order to increase high school graduation rates for this population of
I would
students.
say at the latest 10 years old, right? At the latest.
Yeah. Well, then my second startup that I joined early stage years later would be opening Montessori preschools. And
Hmm.
it was that startup that made me realize, oh, actually, I have to start at birth.
Yeah.
So,
Or earlier, or
yeah, so
earlier.
earlier.
Um, I know it's in order to get into certain private schools in New York City, you have to actually register before you're born.
That's
Um,
insane.
so, so yeah, it's a bit of a hot potato, but certainly as a way, there are many examples of underserved communities
Hmm.
being elevated by a charter school
Hmm.
or a private approach.
Right.
So you and I, as erstwhile liberals, can agree on that. I used to have a political talk show, so that's why I'm so interested.
Oh, me too. Oh, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I did it for 6 years, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, so 10 hours a week.
Oh, wow. Fully immersed.
Fully immersed. Yep, in Aspen. My show was called Con Games, and I was known as the Con Man. So beware, beware.
Cool.
But 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 let's. I want to stick with
Mm.
your journey. So this was a successful startup, the charter startup that you described.
So I left KIPP. I went on to work on a couple of other projects. I ended up actually doing a Fulbright teaching fellowship. And I felt like if I'm going to stay in education for the rest of my career, I at least need to spend a little bit of time feeling the pain of what it means to lead a classroom. So I did that for a year.
Well put. Well put.
um, Met some guys. We started a company. It was a service based business, so not a tech enabled business, but it was in the field of education, sort of tutoring, college admissions for high net worth families. That grew really, really fast. We sold that. And then I came back and went to grad school, as one does. Wasn't quite sure what was next, what to do.
What kind of grad school?
I went to Hugsy, so Harvard School of Education, and studied.
Okay, so you shifted out of you weren't going to go to law school now. By now you're an educator. You're going to go to the Harvard School of Education.
Right, exactly. I wanted to double down on what it meant to maximize human potential, neuroscience of learning, blah, 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 blah.
Very cool.
And it was really fun. After grad school at Harvard, I took a kind of 9 to 5 job as a career coach at Stanford Business School. And
Oh,
that's where my life pivoted to startups, VC, tech, and what that meant. I just sold a company, so I understand what it meant to grow that kind of company, a service-based business, but I had
mhm.
no idea what the world of Silicon Valley and venture capital meant.
Hmm.
And so coming back and taking this very 9 to 5 job at Stanford was really my exposure into that whole world.
And what did you learn? What did you learn that you didn't already know?
Ah, um, so I ended up kind of advising startups that were in the valley. It was in the air everywhere that you breathe, especially at Stanford, and
Yeah.
particularly founders in the education space. I was advising this company that had just received like $1 million from Learn Capital to help start Montessori preschools, tech enabled on the back end, and obviously VC backed. And I was helping them fundraise and think about growth and expansion into international markets. And that's when I really drank the Kool Aid around why early childhood is so critical and to all of education and kind of changing the world. And then as I dove deeper into that particular team and company, I got pulled into the fundraising because I was good at building relationships and doing the BD and growth. And so I worked for about 3 years helping them fundraise. It takes a lot of money to open physical
And
schools.
who are you working for specifically?
The company's called Higher Ground Education.
Higher ground. Okay.
Yeah, and they're still around.
Yeah. Yep. And you are still a scout for FICA Ventures. Um, So you've still they do enterprise software, also some med tech and other things. So you still have your fingers in that.
Yeah.
Um, and did you find? But I think the key thing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the key thing was that at this point you're an educator who has
Hmm.
just had a pretty absorbing job as now you're a coach at Stanford, so you're coaching like really smart, presumably good students, certainly people who are dedicated to being entrepreneurs, or at least the idea of being an entrepreneur.
Hmm.
So did the light bulb go off for you at that point? You're like, this is what I want to do. Did it all kind of come together there?
Yeah, I think spending 3 years raising money, pitching to VCs really opened my eyes to what that world was about and how much power they had in terms of who gets to explore an innovative solution to some big problems.
And
And
how do they? I mean, it seems like I'm fairly new to it too,
yeah.
but there's instincts, there's being instinctual, but there's a certain amount of it being a crapshoot, isn't there?
That I realized.
Yeah,
I
because
realized, yeah.
I just, you know what, one, I've been giving this some thought because I just started a company called Dogtails in
Hmm.
the pet space. And I've been thinking, I've been coaching, doing some coaching at Startup VC in New York as entrepreneur in residence. And I've sort of been asking myself, why did this guy or this woman give up?
Hmm.
And why did this person not give up?
Hmm.
And anyhow, what's your take on that? You work probably with dozens, if not more, entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
what did you find a secret sauce?
Well, I think you're right. I work with something like 20, 25 founders today at various early stages of formation. Some of
Mhm.
them venture back, some of them not quite yet, some of them further along on the kind of product market fit roadmap and really thinking about early days of scale. And I particularly focus on some underrepresented founders, so female founders, BIPOC, LGBTQ, and or whatever. When I was pitching, and doing a lot of the fundraising on that side of the desk, it was rough.
Why was it rough? Because they were not white male, or was it rough for some other reason?
I can't say that it was one particular reason, but
Speaking as I do as a white male,
yeah,
I'm kind of an expert. I'm kind of an expert on having all the advantages. So,
right.
you're Taiwanese American, so you probably felt a lot of empathy for people in that situation. You'd been a startup founder.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why or how does the difficulty for an underrepresented founder, however you want to
Manifest.
define that, how does it manifest? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, here's the truth. That was 10 years ago when I was doing that fundraising,
Mm.
right? So mostly rooms of older white men, some of them really wonderful and woke like you, and some of them not so much. And I was pitching preschools of all things, right, to VC. So it was not an easy sell, but we did it. Today, like even in 2022, it's still single digit percentages, under 10% that of female founders get VC funding. That's what
Yeah.
happened in 2022. 8, 10 years later. So that's the truth. People, it's
I just
private capital.
pardon me for interrupting, but I
No.
mean, um, I know pretty much know that to be true.
Hmm.
And I when I hear that, I just think like that is stupid. I mean, I mean, on this program and just in the course of daily life, I talk to great women founders
Yeah.
3 or 4 times a week.
Hmm.
And I just why are I guess it's because the VCs are also predominantly
Bingo.
male
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
predominantly white. Is it as simple as that?
I think so, to be honest, right? Like the in you do what you're familiar with, and VCs by definition are betting on the unknown and taking risks. And if you know what you know, you're going to invest in what you're familiar with or what you feel like gives you most conviction and confidence. So yes, that's why it's so critical to have people who look of all different sorts, older entrepreneurs, all kinds of other sectionalities to have a place in the capital pipeline.
Do they? Has it changed in 10 years?
On the fringes, I feel like it has. It's
Okay,
it's
maybe just
become,
starting to change, right? Maybe
yeah.
just starting. It's funny. I went to an event, LIGO Partners, which is a really, really smart family office that brings family offices together in deals.
Mhm. Yeah.
I went to their event in New York, and I mean, it was like a frat house. Not in like everybody getting plowed or whatever, but it was like it was all guys,
Hmm.
and all guys, largely guys who'd gone to good colleges and had kind of come up the same way,
Hmm.
with a couple of exceptions.
Right.
And it's just like it's a self perpetuating
Exactly.
thing, and there's nothing that's really happened in a macro way
Mm.
to change that.
Yeah.
There's Ruth Bader Ginsburg. There's the Harvey Weinstein
Hmm.
scandals that launched a movement.
Hmm.
Um, but that's a movement. She's dead.
Hmm.
Abortion is no longer legal
Mm.
in a lot of places, right?
Right.
So it's I like to put this in the category of never underestimate the power of people's resistance to change. People do
100%.
not
Yeah.
want to change. They just don't. And that goes for like, how they put their clothes in their closet and how,
Mhm.
how they walk their dog or,
Yeah.
all the most typical things. So let me ask you this. So you're plugging away with that, but now you're also, it sounds like your primary focus is being a coach.
I for a long time was told that I can't do both things, to invest and coach, and resisted choosing one path. I really think coaching and investing, one makes me better at the other. And the truth is, I want to have a foot in the door of like where that capital goes. I want to be a face that some founders see and say, oh, look, this is someone who allocates money. But at the same time, I also know deeply what kind of support I wish I had when I was going
Mhm.
through the motions of building and leading and trying to operate. And so the coaching piece of it is for me practical. This is the support that founders need. Practical, some interpersonal, some cheerleading or whatever, in addition to capital. And so I
Are
don't
you
want to give up
coaching
either.
companies? Are you coaching companies you've invested in? Is that primarily your the way you do it?
Some, yeah, for some
Some,
I
but not
do.
all.
Yeah,
Some, but not
some.
all.
Exactly. Yeah, I wish I had the ability to invest in all of them.
So you're coaching. That would indicate, and SK, that you're coaching people you like and companies you like. Is that
Yes.
your modus operandi?
My modus operandi is if it's not a hell yes for both of us, then we got to part ways.
And has that happened?
Yeah. Yeah. I get a pretty clear sense really quickly whether or not it's a hell yes for me, both for the idea that they're building as well as the person and the team. And if it is, then let's go. And if not, then I'm happy to refer you to other people. It just, I have a limited bandwidth and I want to be really excited.
Yeah, no, that's the right approach. So do you? It's kind of a funny question. So you invest in a company, you
Yeah.
become their coach. Do they then pay you to be their coach, or is that kind of part of the package?
On occasion, we work on something focused on equity or some compensation, or we reduce it because I do think having some money in the game is really important for accountability purposes. But it depends. I think we do it on a case by case basis.
Does being an investor in a founder that in a company that you're coaching, does that do you coach that in that situation differently than in a situation where you don't have skin in the game?
No, I try not to. I try
Okay,
not to. And usually my personal angel checks are pretty small. It's mostly a kind of token
right.
of my support and dedication to the
Like
mission.
$5,000 to $10,000 or something in that range.
Yeah, my annual checks are anywhere from 5 to about 50, and I do maybe
Uh-huh,
3 or 4 a year max.
uh-huh,
I wish
uh-huh.
I could do more. Someday I will. Um, But
Yeah.
that's my sweet spot. And so I'm very early stage, or I'm kind of a token or someone who understands the industry and I can provide advice, etc.
Okay, so you've been in this for a couple of years now, right? Is this your spiritual home to be a coach and an investor? Because I actually I think investors, many of them, including myself, do coach.
Yeah.
If you're a coach, you kind of coach everybody. I mean,
Mm,
that's my experience. It's like you
that's
can't.
how
It's
you
sort
are.
of it's so hard to turn it off. It's
Yeah.
just like you're saying, well, what if you did this, or what if you did this, or oh, you're doing great, or or you have to change that, right? It's just sort of an
Mhm.
inherent thing to be like that if you're that kind of person. But what is the response of the founders to a coach? And do you think founders it would behoove most founders to have a coach?
I wish I could bestow a
This is
coach
what we
and a
call a meat. This is a meatball question. I
yeah.
just threw a meatball down the middle of the plate for you because you're a coach, and yeah, now you're going to hit the meatball out of the park. You're going to say yes, of course, but seriously, is
Yeah,
it? I mean, I think most founders could benefit for sure.
100%. If I could give everyone, not just founders, but particularly founders, a coach and a therapist, I would love to bestow that on every human,
A
truly.
therapist too.
Yes. So here's the thing.
Where's
Therapy,
the line between the two, though? What's the coach
oh,
and
big line. There are
okay?
two
What is it?
there are two sides of the same coin though. Therapy helps us, in my mind, in my opinion, understand how we got here, who we are, and
Mhm.
gives us insights about that. Coaching takes that insight and says, what's the action plan? How do we move it forward and build from there? It's action oriented, it's plan oriented, it's strategy oriented, at least the way that I do it. And I kind of balance the touchy feely with the very tactical.
Yeah. So put another way, like a therapist would be very likely to ask the equivalent of how are you feeling, how are things going. A coach might, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, but a coach might say, what have you been doing?
Mm,
What are you doing to fix this problem? Or what is the action? In other words, what is the action you're taking? Not like, how do you feel about the action you're taking?
mm.
That kind of thing.
I like to know how you're feeling, and then I like to go, what do you want to feel next? Maybe
Oh,
that's
really?
the
Do you go with the feelings themselves?
sometimes, yeah. I think it's
So
important.
that's interesting. So what would if a founder? So what are some of the responses you've gotten to that question? Because that's such a good approach, such an interesting approach.
Yeah, I like to understand what's going on today, right? Like let's start with here and now. What are you feeling? Why? What's going on? And then we say, okay, where do you want to be? How do you need to feel there? What does that feel like? And then what are the practical steps to get there, both internally and kind of tactically with your business?
How do you? So we're almost out of time. Last question would be, how do you get, given that how difficult it is to have a startup, to run a
Yeah.
startup? How do you combat the notion of failure that it's not working? Because I
Mm,
think that's something founders live with a lot,
yes.
and have to overcome if they're going to succeed. So what do you say to
What
them?
do I
What
do?
is that discussion like?
I fully embrace failure, but we also, the way that I coach is that we meet every other week and we work in 2 week sprints. And I think of everything as hypothesis driven experimentation. And that is the nature of startups, particularly early stage, when you're really kind of working things out, testing things, trying things out. So things will fail, but if you think of them as just failures and not as part of the scientific process of getting to the end goal, then it will stop you, right? So I think of everything as kind of from a design thinking framework. That really helps.
That's very interesting because in another way of saying that might be failure. I'm a storyteller. I think of everything as a story, and failure. If you fail, that's actually the thought that would you would think be the end of the story. You failed. End
Mm,
of story. Go on to the new story. But failure is um, is really not the end of the story.
no.
Failure is, if I could, and I've just thought of this now, but I think failure is the middle of the story.
Yes, yes. My entire career is a series of failures from which I gained really invaluable case studies that
Yeah.
today give me this bank of resources from which I can pull from. That is my life.
SK, I want to thank you. This has been so much fun. I feel like
Oh, me too.
we could go all day.
I
So
know.
we'll definitely have you back. I feel like we just scratched the surface.
Same. Yeah.
But you've been listening to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. Make sure to rate us, subscribe to us, find us on YouTube or all the major podcast platforms. I think over a dozen of them now. And we want to thank a terrific guest, SK Lee. She is the boss lady at the Launch Coaching Lab. She's a scout at FICA Ventures, and she also is an angel investor who writes checks. So you've kind of touched all the bases for us. So really appreciate your being with us, and wish you the best of luck.
So much fun. Thank you, Michael.
And thank everybody for listening. Thanks to everybody for listening to the Accelerator. And as I like to say, we'll be back before you know it with the next podcast. Thank you.